Welcome to the Tacticians Crown Regional Breakdown. This is the APAC edition featuring Tamura. Tamura, thank you for joining me all the way across the ocean.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about TFT, specifically the APAC region.
Absolutely. We're going to start a little bit wide, talking about the region as a whole, and then we'll dive deeper, getting into some of the players and your expectations for the region and your players that you like as a whole. So let's get started with a first question. What do you think makes APAC as a region unique, and how do you think it'll stack up against other regions this year?
I think what makes APAC unique is that we have so many different servers with different countries and different like sub-regions within APAC. And they're not always competing against one another. They have their own regions where they're learning and filling out their own version of the meta, and then they only really clash when it comes to the Tacticians trials and the cups. So I think what makes it different is that you just get a wide range of people who have different views on the meta, and they all kind of clash, and you see which one comes out on top. And so if you compare that to some of the other major regions, a lot of them have been just, either if you're on NA, like a lot of them are just boot camping on NA, and they're all playing around the same server. So they get very familiar with versing each other. Whereas APAC just has so many different things clashing at different stages throughout the set. And I think that's what really sets it apart.
That's very interesting because that is not the same experience we often have in NA. Is like, yeah, everyone kind of plays the same thing because we're all trying to copy Dissoap and Setsuko and make it work. But where APAC,
Definitely.
it's we're all playing our own game in our own region and talking to our own people. That's pretty interesting. I like that a lot, and I think that can bring a lot of evolution within the region. So how has that kind of happened over the recent sets? What has changed in the APAC region?
Well, the major thing I have to point out in like more recent sets is that a lot of the Southeast Asian countries didn't actually have representation before. So we had direct slots from Korea, Japan, OS as well. And so now that we've kind of merged, and some of these other regions which didn't even have a voice have started to really make their mark. You get to see just what the world was missing out on, because so many of these lesser known players were actually always there from the beginning. And I'll talk about this later when I do talk about some of the players from APAC. But I think there's some players who kind of appear as rookies, but they've always been there. They've always been high challenger. They've boot camped in NA, but players just didn't know about them because they weren't allowed to go to Worlds. And so that's like the major difference and kind of evolution of the APAC, is that now we're kind of getting a combination of so many different regions that weren't known. And it's really good to see that some of the regions that didn't have representation before is finally starting to get to show their mark on the world stage.
Yeah, and at least from my perspective, looking at the APAC region, it's the biggest question mark for me as somebody who's pretty plugged into the TFT scene. I don't know much about anyone who's coming out. I know a little bit about some of these specific servers, but I'm sure you're about to talk about some of the Filipino representation that's coming to Worlds for the first time. It's new. It's new to us. So I'm excited for you to continue to tell us some more about some of these players. Let's start with one specific bucket of players. Talking, who are some of your underdogs for this tournament?
Okay, so the two main underdogs that I have, the first one's ARaye. So as you were mentioning before, like Philippines didn't get much representation, and only now I think we've actually got two coming out, but ARaye definitely one of the higher end ones that I've known a little bit about him for a while, but like I said, didn't have the world's representation until recently, so they haven't had as much opportunity as some of the other players in different regions. But something that's interesting to note about him is that he's been playing competitive before I was. He actually competed in I think it was like set 5, or it might be set 5 or set 6, in like a 4v4 tournament when OS and SEA just kind of had like almost for fun tournaments, but it was a pretty official one. Like it had casters and such, and so he's definitely like been around the higher end of ladder well before I was even a player. And so it's great to see that he's finally got a shot at the world stage now, because he's definitely not a rookie by any means, and he's been able to play decently well and like competitive in the last couple of sets. But finally now it's his chance to show up on the world stage, and so I think ARaye is the rookie slash veteran that I'm looking forward to seeing as a major underdog. And then keeping on topic of the underdogs, another one that kind of stood out to me was Ironborg. for the complete opposite
Yeah.
reason that ARaye is an underdog to look out for. Because Ironborg won the whole thing. He won the spatula for this set, and so he definitely has what it takes to compete with the best of best from APAC. So I'm sure he'll be able to bring that to the world stage. But he has barely any experience. If you look at his Wikipedia, it's just not competed in that many sets. So I think it'll be like really interesting to see if he can kind of just show up and be the dark horse that comes out of nowhere, showing some representation from Hong Kong. And I looked at some of his games as well. It was nice to see that he had he wasn't a meta slave. He was willing to play a wider range of lines. He had a really nice Syndra game, which I know a lot of people are still scared of touching her, just because she's been dead for so many patches. But he recognized the spot, and it was definitely good enough to perform. And I just think it'll be funny to see if maybe he can show up, win the title, and then he'll be the reigning champion. All he has to do is hop on a ferry, go across to Macau, and he he can not defend the world championship, but be a big contender at a LAN maybe.
Yeah, that would be a legendary entrance, I'm sure, to be the hometown hero there. That would be awesome. And I'm excited to watch both of those players. Obviously, the great run from Ironbog in regionals was amazing. And so able to secure that victory heading into Worlds is really good momentum. But who would you say then is the people that have the strongest chance? If it's not your regional champion, who do you think has the best chance of making it deep in the tournament and winning the whole thing?
Yeah, so you could look at the APAC lineup and you can't help but like talk about Title. So Title's obviously world's winner. He's super consistent player. He's been playing well before. He's been playing earlier than me as well. Like earlier back into I believe it was set 6 might have been his first world's run. He's been carrying Japan, winning almost all of their regionals back when it was not APAC regionals. It was
Yep.
specifically just Japanese regionals, and he would just consistently show up. He was really putting Japan on his back, and even receiving like second at Worlds, and that wasn't good enough. So he came back a few sets later and got first, and then doing really well in the Chinese Invitational as well. I believe he might have won one of those as well. If you look at his Wikipedia, it's just first across the board. And specifically, not just about his accolades as to why I think he'll do well is if you actually watch his gameplay. So the biggest thing for me that stands out with Tidal is that he has very clear direction. He plays like a very similar line across all of his sets, and it's very consistent. But the thing that stands out for me is some of his decisions aren't that. It makes me think that he's not a meta slave because he clearly thinks differently about the game and he questions everything, which leads to him to having different opinions than a lot of the top players. And this is not necessarily a bad thing because a lot of the times it obviously shows that it works well in his favor. But a lot of times when I'm watching his gameplay, there'll be certain things that I'll just look at and I'll be very confused because it'll be completely different to what I would think, and I'd turn to some other challenger players and go like, oh, what would you have done here? And it's completely different to what Title would have done. But it shows that it's working because even if he questions everything and doesn't follow the meta in a way that's very direct, it eventually leads him to putting himself in a better understanding of the game as a whole. And then when it's time to show up for tournaments, it really shows through. So that's why I think Tidal just has such a good grasp of the fundamentals, but also of the intricacies throughout a set. So which is why I think he'll do really well. And then two of the other players that I want to talk about is YBY1. So absolute ladder demon. So many players have done VOD reviews of him just because he's been dominating the scene on the ladder, reaching really high levels of LP. And it's clear to see why. If you watch his gameplay, he is very greedy. He's kind of like the Setsuko of APAC, I would say, of just how he's able to abuse weak lobbies. So I was a little bit worried looking at the meta going into Worlds that maybe his fast 8 tempo style wouldn't be super favorable in this meta. But then watching some of his games, he was more than willing to play around a lot of the reroll lines. So it's good to see that he recognizes that he can't always play for these fast tempo solo queue style. So he'll be able to play around a lot more of those reroll lines. But then when he gets the spot to play tempo, out of all the players at Worlds, he'll be one of the better players to do so. So that's why I think that as long as he has a good grasp on the meta, he'll be in a really good spot to go far. And then finally, I want to talk about ScSc. So a little bit overshadowed, I'd say, by Bintim because Bintim just had so many accolades in the T1 side. But when he paired up with him in the 4v4 tournament, they actually did really well. I think they got second. And I got the pleasure of scrimming against their team a couple of times before we played our qualifiers. And if I had to describe their gameplay, I'd say that when they played tempo, it just felt like they had infinite money because they were so good at finding cheap lines in order to push their advantage. And so I think ScSc hasn't had incredible accolades in international events other than the second with the team. So I think this is going to be a chance for him to, shine on his own. And he's surrounded by obviously a really, really good team of T1. So I look forward to seeing his gameplay as well.
Yeah, those three are just absolute monsters, right? The people you look at in APAC, you're like, oh, I know these three players. These three players are consistent and they're dominant. And so for title, obviously coming back for the title, wanting to reclaim that. And then YBY1 has had some good showings as well. And ScSc also pretty consistent. And so excited to watch those players, see if they can really set themselves apart as some of those APAC GOATs for sure. I know titles probably claimed that, but turning the ladder demon title that YBY1 has into a world champion, a Tactician's crown holder, that would be pretty sweet. So how does the APAC region, how does it kind of view the other international regions? Do you guys look at yourselves as kind of the underdog dark horses that maybe NA and EU kind of look at APAC as?
Yeah, I'd definitely say so. Especially with this set, if you look across the board, we have a lot more rookies, and that's just kind of the way it goes with the format because we have so many different sub regions competing in the cups, and so if you have some of these bigger names, they can even be struggling to make it to regionals just because you have to have a consistent showing across all of the cups, and if you can't do that, if you have like one or two bad cup performances, there's only really a few guaranteed slots for certain regionals, for certain sub regions, and so yeah, you definitely have a lot more underdogs making their way through because all it really takes is, for example, someone like Ironbog who's come through and just had a very consistent showing across three cups and then just dominated through on the final one, and you will get these underdogs who haven't had as much experience. That on top of the fact that a lot of these Southeast Asian countries weren't even allowed to go to Worlds before because they didn't have representation. You just pair all that together, and of course you're just going to get a lot of dark horse, a lot of dark horse contenders. As for like stacking up against some of the other regions, though, as much as I don't like to inflate NA's ego any more than it already needs to be, definitely have to give them credit for their recent performances. They've shown up consistently over the last couple of sets, even kind of dethroning China as the main region that basically everyone was scared of previously. And I also want to give a shout out to not just NA, but also some of the other representation from the Americas region, because NA has definitely been a lot more dominant over their South American counterpart. But I'd say that if you look across the field, the representation from Brazil, and I believe also was it an Argentinian representative, they don't have as many strong contenders, but the ones who are good are very consistent and very good. And I believe some of them made it through this set. So I think that as a whole, the Americas region has a very strong standing. And then if you look across the EMEA, the biggest one that stands out to me is just Double. Incredible consistency across so many different sets. And he just consistently shows up. People might have thought that he peaked early, but then just kept coming back and showing why he's such a consistent world contender. And then of course, if you look into China, like China's always sending demons, and we've seen like people look at the big names from China and they go, oh, this one's scary, like 60-second Huan Mi, they're the two that stand out the most for me. But when they sent the mobile players just stomped on all of us in that previous set. So you can never really count any of them out. And so that's like the main overview, I'd say, having a quick glance across most of the different regions from our perspective, I'd say.
Yeah, it's going to be a great weekend full of just the highest level of TFT, especially here in set 12. And so I'm excited to see the class of regions, see which region will come out on top. Obviously, the Americas has had some success recently, but I'm looking for APAC to hopefully make a run at it and maybe reclaim that. They haven't had it since title, right? That was a few sets ago.
Yeah, I believe so.
So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what will transpire, what storylines will come out of this world. And I'm thankful for you being able to come here and share some of those storylines with us, help APAC get some of their stories out there. So thanks for your help.
Happy to be here. Thanks for setting it up. I'm always happy to talk TFT.
Absolutely. And we'll be talking, me and you will both be talking a lot more TFT this weekend on the alternative broadcast. So I'm excited for that. Make sure you tune back in. We will have one more regional breakdown, hopefully covering China coming out here tomorrow as well. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.